Welcome back to another episode of the Tommy Brideson Show. Now today I'm going to be running through the linchpins that I use for deadlifts, specifically to get the most out of your positioning so that you can put up the strongest and most effective deadlift that you possibly can. Now the deadlift's a little bit of an interesting lift where if you look at a squat and a bench press, for instance, on the way down, you have that lengthening of the tissue, the lengthening of the muscle. So you're getting all that sensory input back towards your brain, right? So your body's figuring out what it needs to do on the eccentric portion of the movement itself. Now, the deadlift is quite unique where you are actually shortening everything from word go. So what we're doing is trying to get you in an optimal position to start the deadlift, and then we're shortening all your muscles to bring it together to perform the lift. Now, that's unique because you need to be in the exact right position from word go of the deadlift. Otherwise, you're going to be leaking performance, you're going to be leaking power, which then can lead to a whole host of issues like in terms of compensations in your deadlift pattern itself. So what we need to do when we're deadlifting is look at it from a big bird's eye view, look over the top of it and go, what's the most important thing that we need to be doing when we're deadlifting? And how do we emphasize that? And how do we make that part of your deadlift pattern itself? Now, the linchpins that I use for deadlifting specifically is creating your hinge at the start of the movement as you're trying to get yourself into the position. So you want to set the intent of the hinge from word go and then never lose it. Now we'll run over that in a little bit more in detail. Now the next bit is taking slack out of the bar, but then also incorporating in a wedge. So it's basically how we create tension into the bar, and this is how we overcome not having an eccentric or a lowering movement. We're creating the tension that we want into the bar itself. And then the third one is maintaining your position off the floor and actually building momentum off the floor into the locked out position. Now, when you get these three components right in your deadlift will make so much progress with very little input in terms of exercise selection, in terms of programming variables. So when you get these right, it's so powerful and effective. Now, if we have a look at the first one, thinking about a deadlift itself, you really want to set this hinge. Now, as you do it, you've got to think about doing an RDL. So you set your hinge, you're sitting back into the hips, and you never lose that position. So quite often what you see people do is they set the hinge position and then they go down to grab the bar and they just lose their hinge completely. Their pelvis rounds over, their lower back loses position, and then throughout the entire movement, you're trying to rectify that and bring the position back together. So what you want to do is make sure that as part of your process when you're setting up, when you're setting that hinge, it's almost like you're setting into a RDL type position. You're feeling your glutes, you're feeling your hamstring, and you're just in a really nice, crisp position. When you do that, it's a lot more effective and easy to create a brace. You feel the hamstring, the glutes actually do a lot more work, and then you can focus on the next linchpins. So just wrapping up the hinging component, how I would start it is get yourself a perfect distance away from the bar. So that's say about an inch. I almost just look down over my foot and split the bar directly through your shoelaces or through the middle of your foot. And then when you're in that position, you sit that as if you're doing an RDL, you haven't changed the angle of your knee at all, and then you're basically in a really nice hinged position. So from word go, you basically hold that and you don't lose it, and now we're gonna link in the next two linchpins. Now, from there, we basically want to move into linchpin number 2, which is taking slack out of the bar and then creating a wedge. Now, they're often thought about as different things, but they're really the same thing. So you set your hinge, and then what we want to do is grab the bar and pull up into the barbell. Now, think about it like this. The bar is attached to your hand and your hand is attached to your shoulder. That is one thing that just works in unison, and it's just a fixed object. You're not really doing anything with it. You're just creating tension from the bar to your shoulder so that can link into the rest of your body. That's what we need to start to think about doing. So as we get into the hinge position, we grab the bar. What we want to do is almost just pull up into the bar. It's not really squeezing your shoulders back. It's not really depressing the lats. It's just creating tension and stiffness where you're pulling up into the bar, and it starts to create a little bit of stiffness into the bar itself. Now, what ends up happening is as you drop your hips down, your chest will start to elevate up like that. And you've got that fixed amount of tension into the bar, your knees will gravitate and move forward towards the bar, and you'll be in a perfect position to lift up off the ground. So when we're looking at it, you set your hinge, you set your hands into the bar itself, and you're pulling up. And as you squeeze your knees forward into the bar, that is one concurrent movement up into the start of the deadlift position. So you can see you've set your hips, you've set the tension into the bar, which links all the way back to your hips. And then it's just a matter of moving into linchpin 3, which is essentially pushing the floor away. So I haven't wrapped up on linchpin number 2, but you can see how they all start to stack up on each other. So you've got the first one that sets, the second one that creates tension. Then we need to continue building that tension off the floor. So that's really what we're trying to do. Now, with the slack pull itself, it's one of those ones, it's probably most described as like squeezing your shoulders back and down or getting your lats on. But the reality is it's a stiffness. So if you put your arm directly out in front of you and you make a fist, you can feel the stiffness and the tightness that you get around the actual shoulder itself. That's the type of tension that you want to hold. Because if I squeeze my shoulder back and say you were, for instance, to pull my arm forward, it's not a very strong position because the muscles at the back of the shoulder are quite small. So what we want to do is use the bigger muscles in order to create stiffness, but then link it back into a full body movement. So you want to think a fist out, stiff arm, and you can just feel everything around the shoulder actually create tension. Then from that position, the wedge is, it's really about timing on the wedge. Now, what we want to do is as we're pulling up into the bar, we've got to think about a vertical movement. We're pushing the floor away and we're pulling the bar up off the ground. But what we want to do is then we want to squeeze the hips forward towards the bar because we need to get the hips directly underneath your shoulders. So there's movement. Think about this. There's movement going up towards the roof. You're pushing the floor away, but we also need to squeeze the hips towards the bar. So that's the wedge component. And if you've got the slack pulling up into the bar and you're pushing into the floor, the wedge component, really all we're doing is continuing to pull up and push the hips forward into the actual bar itself to get you into a vertical and an upright position. Now, I'm gonna run over a little bit later, like what it looks like when you don't get these particular portions right. But I'm gonna move into linchpin number 3 and just give a bit of an overview of that. Now, with a deadlift itself, off the floor, you need to actively create the tension that you want. It doesn't come naturally. You need to physically put tension into the floor exactly where you want so that you can maintain your position and maintain the intent of the position as you start and then continue on through the movement itself. So when you're thinking about a deadlift, you're really starting to push the floor away. You're creating tension into the floor and it's literally like a leg press. So you're pushing the floor away, and if you're looking side on, your body, your torso position doesn't change. So it's, as you start to break the floor, the first portion of the lift is actually your legs moving. You're pushing away, your knee starts to straighten out, but your torso actually just lifts like that until the wedge kicks in. So off the floor, you need to create the tension through the slack into the wedge. And then when you're pushing, you need to actively extend through your upper back. So you're thinking about creating tension up towards the roof. So what happens if you don't? You essentially will get pulled out of position, or as you go to push off the floor, your hips may lift or the deadlift positioning will change. So when you're looking at it side on and you're thinking about like, am I creating enough tension off the floor? We really need to be looking at like what the actual position of your torso is doing, and is the bar staying close to the shin in the position that we set it? If there's any changes in that position, you've essentially fallen out of position off the floor. So this is a really important one, is with the deadlift itself, off the floor, it's often quite slow because there's no momentum. You have to start creating that movement from a dead stop on the floor. So what you want to do is push the floor away, and the lift actually accelerates throughout the lift. You'll get faster and faster as it goes through. And once the bar gets past your knees, you can snap your knees straight and then throw your torso back, and you've locked it out. Now, if you have a look at someone that's really, really effective with their deadlift, whether it's sumo or conventional, you'll see it starts slow and it ends quick with a really efficient lockout. So it's like knees, hips, shoulders, and you get into that really nice upright position. So that's always a really good thing to look out for as well. When you're looking at creating tension off the floor, is you're like, okay, well, if someone's trying to start too fast, you'll see it's almost like a yank at the bar. But what you want to be doing is more so building the tension, creating that full body tension so that you squeeze the weight off the floor. It's very different than like trying to be powerful. Yes, the deadlift movement is a powerful movement, but it doesn't start fast. It's sort of slow to start and then builds momentum. Now, deadlifts probably, from a movement standpoint, are the simplest. You're essentially just bending over and picking something up off the ground. So really the hardest portion of it is linking the tension that you're trying to create in your whole body, and you have to actively create it. And, as it gets heavier and heavier and heavier, it's harder and harder to maintain that position because the weight, it doesn't get any easier. It gets harder. So you've really got to oppose the force of the weight trying to, essentially stay on the ground. So you have to be really mindful with the intent you put behind your technique and how you initiate and then how you hold your position through the actual deadlift itself. Now, looking at a deadlift, it's pretty simple in theory. If you're looking at it side on and you're filming yourself, or you're a coach and you're looking at someone deadlift, what is a really easy way to look if they're maintaining position, they're creating slack, is side on. There should be a vertical bar path at all times with the deadlift. So it's one of those movements that the bar path should be vertical no matter how you deadlift at all, because your goal is to move your body around the bar, not the bar around your body. That's a really important thing. So the bar path shouldn't move forward or backwards. It's a straight up and a straight down. That's a really good indicator that you're in a strong position. Now, with the deadlift itself, probably the biggest thing that someone that's not, say, a powerlifter or someone's not really into the depths of strength training is quite often we miss the hinge, right? So we turn the deadlift into a little bit more of a squatting pattern. And what that looks like is when you're looking at it side on, you've got a lot of knee over bar, and your body position literally looks like a squat. But what ends up happening is as you start to break the floor, the bar essentially will have to move around your knees to get you into a position when you're fully standing up with the weight. Now, that is a really ineffective way of doing it. And as it gets heavier and heavier, you won't be able to do that. It's the pattern will just fall apart, and you'll probably always just miss deadlifts at the knees. Or if you are to experience some pain, you'll probably experience it around that middle portion of the lift itself. So the first thing to look out for is, yes, you want your knees involved in the deadlift. Like you want to have that bit of knee drive over the bar to allow you to break the floor and create some momentum off the floor because your quads are quite strong. But you only want as much as you need to be able to break and create momentum, right? So you don't want too much. So that's the first thing that I always look out for. And the second thing is when you're looking at it side on, you can pretty much see when someone sets up or if they reset to go for another rep, if they've lost their hinge, because they fall out of position, their pelvis and their back positions like rounded out. And then you see pulling back down and trying to like create the same position that they had, for instance, on the first rep. So what we really want to be doing is trying to preserve that hinge from word go. So linchpin number one for me is all about setting that hinge position and maintaining it, because, in a movement, whether it's bench, squat, deadlift, any movement, you are only as good as a position you can hold. And say at the start of a movement, you're in 100% of that movement, like it's perfect. If you lose 2% each rep you do, the reps are going to slowly degrade. But say, for instance, on a deadlift, if you drop down to the ground and you go to reset, but you fully lose your hinge, you may only get 70 or 60% of that hinge back. So the movement pattern, each rep gets less effective. So when you're looking at it side on and you're looking at, say, you're doing a set of 3, say the first rep's really, really lovely. You've got a really nice hinge, you break the floor well, but then you drop the weight to the ground and you fully lose your body position and you have to pull yourself back in. That's a sign that you've fallen out of position. So you want to see if there's some way that in your deadlift pattern itself, you can drop back down without having to do a full reset. So that's another real component to look out for when you're looking at your deadlifts itself. Then the third one is, and this is probably arguably the most important, is off the ground as you start to break the ground. If your hips are lifting faster than the shoulder, so you're looking at side on, if your hips are lifting faster than the level of the shoulder, what that means is that you've lost all your push power. You haven't got any of your quads involved. So your body's defaulting back to just essentially like an RDL type position. Now, if you were training RDLs, that's fantastic. But the reality is it's not the strongest position to be breaking the floor with. So what you want to be making sure you do is keeping the system tight. So it starts by creating a hinge, pulling up into bar and creating that wedge and that slack pull. Then as you're breaking the floor, you're continuing to maintain that tension up into the bar. And when I'm thinking about it side, I'm looking at it, it's like the hips are pivoting. They're the rotation point. And your body is levitating up like that to a point where you can stand up straight and get your hips all the way through underneath you. So when you're looking at it side on, you want to make sure that your shoulders, you're almost initiating it with your torso lifting up towards the roof whilst you push the floor away. It's one that you really have to be mindful of doing. And if, say for instance, you start and you have a shin angle that's way too vertical, it's going to be really hard to push the floor away. You're not going to be able to use your quad because you've got no knee bend. So this is the thing with deadlift positioning is it's quite simple in theory because you only have a small amount of knee movement, you have a big amount of hip movement, but the positioning, the hardest part of it all is maintaining it through. So as a checklist, how I would run through your deadlift from top to bottom, set your hinge, create slack and take tension up into the bar. And then the wedge component is you pushing your knees forward into the bars till they touch, but not allowing the bar to move forward. And then you're pushing the floor away from that position, but leading from your torso. So your torso is going to be leading off the ground faster than your hip position. So your hips aren't lifting up off the floor. And if you do that, as soon as you get to the knees, you squeeze your knees and you lean your torso back, you will be in a really strong and efficient deadlift pattern. So quite often when we do too much movement in a deadlift, so what we actually want to do is condense it down, make it tight, make it really effective and snappy. And that's what's going to allow you to make progress with your deadlift over time. Now, depending on how you lift as well. So you've got sumo deadlifts and conventional deadlifts. Sumo deadlifts, in more cases than not, you will have a vertical shin path, but a shin angle. And you'll be in that wider stance position, but you'll see from side on, the torso angle is a lot more upright. But because your legs are in a wider position, you still get a lot of that quad and that pushing power. Where in the conventional, because your feet are a lot closer together, there will be that knee over bar and your torso position won't be as upright as a sumo, but it's all that it needs to be because then you're really optimizing the hinge position in the actual deadlift pattern itself. Now, there are a lot of individual variations when it comes to deadlifts as well. So, an attribute that makes a deadlifter really good is someone that has long arms and long torso. So what that means is someone, say, that had average size legs and had really long arms and long torso, it means that their torso position can be a lot more upright. So it's a lot easier for that person to break the ground, hold tension and hold their position off the floor because they're a lot more upright. It removes a little bit of the weakness and the weak point through their back because they're a lot more upright. So that kind of makes sense. Now, for instance, the polar opposite of that is someone that has really short arms, really short torso, and then average all long size legs. That means when you're looking at their deadlift, their pattern's going to be quite different. Their hips are probably going to be in a higher hip position to start off with, and they're not going to have as much reach to the bar. So their deadlift is going to look very different to someone that has long arms. Now, obviously, once you get into the nuances of your deadlifting and you sort of, you're ramping up your strength or ramping up your volume, there's a lot that you can do to play around with to try and get your deadlift position better. Like, say for instance, you do fall into the category of short arms, short torso, long legs. You can bring your feet together closer so that you have even more knee over the bar, because what that will allow you to do is bring your torso into a more upright position. But if you were that lifter and you had a wide stance, you would have almost a vertical shin angle, but your torso would be quite high as well. So you would essentially be doing a stiff leg deadlift off the floor. And same again with sumo deadlifting, for instance. If you have average or short size legs and you have really long arms and a long torso, as soon as you start to get momentum off the floor and you start to break the floor and create that movement, it's almost locked out. because you're in such an upright position to start with and you have that long reach, it really just allows you to create such an optimal position off the floor. So, unfortunately, these aren't things that we have any control over. So once you start deadlifting, if you follow the linchpins and you follow setting a hinge, creating slack pull, creating a wedge into the bar, and then really trying to hold position and create that push power off the floor, what that's going to allow you to do is create like a really objective system to look at your deadlift. Then you can go, okay, well, I'm in the swing of things. My deadlift pattern's moving well, but I really want to optimize it. That's when you go, okay, well, this is potentially my type of body type. So from here, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to improve on my positioning. That's when you start to play around with those nuances and try and sort of get a little bit more out of it. But if you just follow the linchpins to start, you will clear up 90% of any potential issues that you're having with your deadlift. It'll be so much more effective. You're going to be able to build a lot more momentum with volume and all strength. And it's just going to, you're also going to recover a lot better from the deadlifts as well, because you're not kind of fighting yourself. So like the deadlift pattern it has copped a lot of criticism, around like deadlifts are bad for your back and, stuff like that. But the reality is it's actually just the positioning that holds it all together that makes it a slightly tricky movement. But once you get the linchpins and you get your positioning cleared up, it actually is one of the most effective movements for helping build strength and build resilience through your body. And I think if we were looking at, say squat, bench, and deadlift, for instance, the deadlift is a really important movement. It is the one that holds it all together. It's a huge group of muscle mass that often are really neglected. So if we strengthen those up, a lot of the rest of your training actually improves. So recapping, we've got 3 linchpins, we've got slack pull, we've got wedging, we've got setting a hinge, and then we've got holding your position off the floor so that you can bring it all together to create an active movement that's stiff and stable. And you really need to be intentful with the movement that you create off the floor. So they're the linchpins that I use, and I've had great success with them. And if anyone new comes into the gym, that is the exact process that we follow to get them deadlifting, and then we look at optimizing the small nuances. That's it for me today, and I'll see you on the next episode.